Hey there, and welcome back to another Percy Jackson and the Olympians Season 2 video. And today we're going to be talking about the latest episode to drop, Episode 3, We Board the Princess Andromeda, which follows off from the big cliffhanger of the previous episode where Tantalus tried to execute Tyson, Percy, and Annabeth for trying to escape the camp. Okay, so as always, potential book spoilers are in this video in case you're a show only, and so with all that being said, let's jump into things, shall we? We start off the episode with a look at Clarice entering the Oracle's attic to hear her prophecy before she goes on her quest. This was an addition to the story I really loved, because the book series is framed from Percy's point of view. If he doesn't see it happen, then either he has to have a dream about it, or he needs to be told about it later on. That works fine when you're reading about things because it can be carried by Percy's own internal monologue, but in a show format, it becomes way less compelling. The classic phrase is show, don't tell for a reason. It's because that's what audiences are going to most connect with as opposed to long-winded expositional dialogue. I'm pretty sure that in the book, Clarice tells Percy way later on when they meet up in the Sea of Monsters, so it's good to have this now, especially since it seems like we're getting a lot more Clarice content to flesh out her character as one of the key players this season. I have to say, this scene is also just ridiculously funny. She knows for a fact that this is the Oracle. A fact. It's not like the camp is going to have some weird monster lady hiding out in the attic, and I'm sure somebody's referenced what she looks like before. Yet when she starts moving, Clarice just straight up kills her. Very Aries coded because this is the fight and the fight or flight response, but also pretty stupid when you think about it. She turns to leave, and I do wonder what sort of explanation she was going to offer at all to Tantalus or Mr. D. Oops, I killed the Oracle of Delphi. Sorry. Probably wouldn't have gone down too well, so it's a good thing that Hades cursed this thing to be unable to die properly, right? Well, good thing for Clarice. Pretty sure the Oracle's not having a grand old time of it, being cursed to be a zombie because Hades was salty Zeus murdered his mistress. Here we get the first three lines of the prophecy. You shall sail the iron ship with warriors of bone. You shall find what you seek and make it your own, but despair for your life entombed within stone. And then it says, and fail, but you don't end up hearing the rest. Instead, it cuts off and we see her run downstairs, and then cut to her thinking about the prophecy whilst Tantalus rants about how Percy and Annabeth are gone, and so Clarice needs to pick somebody else to go on the quest, which of course we later see she doesn't. I do have my thoughts about that, but it's probably more relevant to talk about that when we get to the scene of her and Aries. From here we move on to Percy and the gang on Princess Andromeda. We see a wide shot of them in their little dinghy coming up behind a cruise ship. I'm guessing that either Poseidon's helping them out or Percy has some sort of control over the waves, because whilst boats and smaller vessels sometimes sail behind cruise ships for safety reasons, I don't think they get that close because the wake would be immense and create really turbulent waters. On top of that, they're in a dinghy, which is not the best choice for such conditions. They easily flip. The episode also conveniently skips the part where these three are able to scale the entire cruise ship all the way to what seems to be the top deck. I think I can move past the idea of them climbing balcony to balcony because they are demigods and Tyson is a cyclops, you know? So I can suspend my disbelief and say they're very strong. But here, when they're chasing the ship, and if you look, there is a vast stretch of smooth metal with no handholds at all, and yet they somehow scale it with what seems to be no equipment. How is that even possible? I did find it very funny they skip to the top deck so they don't even have to try to bother with those details, but the idea of them having to try to human fly their way up the smooth walls or whatever you call them, that was the perfect mental image for me. It seems that on the surface, this is just your average cruise ship with nothing really suspicious going on, and I do honestly have to wonder, why is it that Luke even has a cruise ship? I mean, it's clearly being run by Luke or whatever, so why bother with all the deception and having mortals on board to begin with? We see later on that Clarice sails her own ship that isn't being picked up by the Coast Guard or anything, so why does Luke bother with this? Do they really need money or something to fund their war? Is there a place where you can convert your US dollars to ancient Greek drachmas? Just odd for him to do, right? Percy and the gang arrive at their room, and whilst Tyson goes to dry off, Percy wants to talk with Annabeth about there being something he isn't supposed to know. How they can create a code word for when he's getting too close to doing something that'll move him towards that knowledge, so he'll be able to back off. The word he selects for this is boon. I have to say, I liked this, it was very good. I'm glad they're not forcing too much drama between Percy and Annabeth, at least in regards to her lying to him and telling Clarice not to pick him on the quest, because that would have really sucked quite hard, and would have been very forced for the plot. So I'm really glad they're not extending things out here. That being said, I do wonder if they're going to integrate any of the Tyson drama with Annabeth, or are they just going to have her be distant until they think he died and then be nice to him afterwards? I mean, they really honed in on her being weirded out by him in the first two episodes and felt like they were setting something up, but it almost feels as if we're reaching a point where it's not really relevant to why she doesn't like him anymore, you know? It sort of feels like the moment has passed in that regard. The scene also has some excellent lines from Tyson and Percy to one another. First, when Percy's trying to whisper and Tyson from the bathroom says that he can still hear him, and then when he says, "This stinks," after Percy says his code word's going to be boon, which gets Percy all annoyed. I don't know, I kind of like that they only briefly did the whole distant brother thing here where he's actively trying to keep him away and feels massively humiliated by him. I just think it's a more enjoyable watch and keeps Percy feeling way more likable overall, which is really what you want for your lead character, because the reality is, once a character gets painted with the unlikable brush, it's often hard to win back the audience. When Percy says that since they're on a cruise ship they should be able to have fun, Tyson comes out of the bathroom and says that the bad smell is monsters, which leads our trio above deck again, but then we cut back to Clarice, which I honestly found a little bit frustrating because you want to get to the drama, you know? You want to be able to see the big plot points and the action and the monster fights, but of course this stuff is necessary too. Clarice walks out of the camp and comes across her dad, who of course treats her like shit. What I liked here is that he even treats her worse than when he first met Percy, Annabeth and Grover, while she interacts with him differently to how we've seen others interact with their godly parents. We know that Percy was pretty open with his dad in that one conversation, and it's obvious that Luke wasn't bowing down to his dad and calling him Lord Hermes. Stuff like this does serve to somewhat restore the aura he lost when 12-year-old Percy Jackson was able to get the drop on him in season 1. Not that Percy truly won or anything like that, but still, getting tricked into taking first blood in a duel with a 12-year-old when you are the god of war is pretty cringe. Clarice tells him that she isn't bringing anybody else along on the quest because they're dead weight, and I do wonder what the play is here. The final line of the prophecy is, "and fail without friends to fly home alone." So she leaves Chris behind and doesn't choose a new camper to replace Annabeth. Did she misinterpret the prophecy here or what? Is she an idiot? Does she know she has no friends, so there's no point in trying? What's going on? Aries takes her to the ship and shows her that she has a bunch of losers of different wars and battles to service her crew, including a dead employee of Blockbuster, which has got to be one of the funniest jokes in the show so far. This is the type of ridiculous stuff that would appear in the books that added so much to the world, but was largely lacking from season 1. I'm really happy to see that sort of thing be integrated more and more. I also just loved getting to see how much Aries is just such a piece of shit. First up, he very much threatens Clarice with punishment if she fails, and by saying, "you know what will happen," it suggests to me that he's been liberal with his punishments to his kids before. On top of that, I found it really interesting that despite him threatening her that she has to do a good job since he's already in the doghouse on Olympus, he still can't resist undermining her authority to the crew by emphasizing how she lacks any sort of experience. He calls her a little girl and says she is woefully inexperienced, which in turn leads to the crew not respecting her later on. So is this a test to see if she has what it takes, or is this just a showcase of how Aries is a massive asshole and can't resist taking his own daughter down a peg and asserting dominance even if it goes against his own interests? Either way, I think it's a pretty intriguing moment within the scene and really helps to flesh out the character of both Aries and Clarice. Honestly, a great scene that actually justifies taking you away from the main plot. I really do think that showcasing more of Clarice is a smart move that's going to pay off. I just wonder where they're going to go with it in future seasons. Will things be added to keep her with more of a role in every season, or is she going to be in and out every so often like with the books? It's then back over to the cruise ship where our trio spot the 3 giants from earlier, with the one that died seemingly back alive again. So is there any real reason that Annabeth doesn't put on her hat and cheap kill all 3 of them? I feel like that would have been the sensible play. Instead, they just let them go. I know that Percy later on says that they took a service elevator and they couldn't follow, but they weren't exactly going very fast. They even stopped for food. Then again, you kill them and it seems that they can just easily come back to life, as one of them was only dead for about a day, right? Aren't they supposed to reform really slowly outside of a few specific instances? Here we meet Allison again, and she acts all happy to see Annabeth and concerned about the giants because she has other demigod friends on the ship. I really love this portrayal, to tell you the truth. It's nice to have a human character who's just horrible, and you want to see them get their just desserts. No redemption, no nuance, she just sucks. She was straight up just going to kill Grover in episode 1, which based on Luke's current characterization, he would not want. And then she's going to kill these 2, even though we learn through dialogue later on, Luke doesn't want that either. She's just perfectly happy to murder somebody she's known since Annabeth was a little girl and a complete stranger who's done nothing wrong. Yes, I do love an unambiguous villain. They are needed alongside the more grey characters to make a story compelling, if you ask me. I also like that she's pretty serious business as a fighter. I mean, yeah, she's a fully grown and well-trained demigod thrown down with 2 13-year-olds, but at the same time, it's not like they just smack her around and toss her off the ship like trash. She does hold her own, and that's when she's alone and was just catching some sun on the deck of the ship. She had no reason to think she'd be in a fight, and if she was well prepared, I reckon she would have had more of a chance, which ups the stakes and makes her seem like more of a threat and the world all the more dangerous. She's a really great show original character, and I hope she lingers around a little more, although part of me thinks she dies at some point this season to give the campers a bit of a win. How now that I think about it, they don't even really beat her here. They mostly get slapped around and Annabeth dodges and she loses her balance and falls off the ship, which once again just doubles down on that threat factor the rogue demigods have and makes things feel more dangerous. I guess she also has to human fly her way up the side after that, which is a pretty funny mental image. Her just absolutely seething while soaking wet and trying to scramble up the side of the ship. Percy and Annabeth take her bag to their room and they start going through their stuff and quickly discover that not only is Luke on board, but this is his ship. Once again, we get more of the silliness the first season lacked as they watch a video package advertising the cruise to both monsters and demigods. Although once again, I got a question. Why the hell are there mortals on the ship? It's kind of funny, but at the same time, it's just odd to me, you know? Then once again, as we're getting somewhere, we cut away to Clarice for more character building. She goes below deck on her own ship and finds her crew just chilling, and so she tries to act like Aries and bully them into going along with her, but they just laugh and keep on drinking and singing. The highlight of this scene for me is the Blockbuster employee trying to pretend like the streaming wars were an actual war. I wonder what even happened to this dude. Was he murdered by a Netflix employee in a bar fight or something? At first, I will admit I was a bit frustrated to return to Clarice's storyline for what seemed to be a mostly nothing scene. However, when you couple it up with the sequence that comes later where she chooses a different path and is a more inspirational leader who offers rewards and glory and they all respond well to that, it makes sense. It shows she isn't some two-dimensional bully who's a pale pale shadow of her father, but rather somebody who's forging her own path and embodying her father's sphere of influence, but in a different way. She's a leader rather than a tyrant, and I just think it's been really good writing surrounding her character so far. It's honestly been a standout, and I wasn't expecting it coming into the season, but hell yeah, I'm all on board. Then it's back over to Percy and the gang, where we have an interesting scene where Percy pretty much just wants to kill Luke, and Annabeth is not keen. She tells Percy that when Luke stabbed Thalia's tree, it was like seeing her brother stab her sister, and that while she's angrier at Luke than anybody, at the same time, she doesn't want to see him dead, and I think this is by far the better perspective. Honestly, I don't even remember if this was in the book, but is anybody a bit weirded out that Percy, only a year into being a demigod, and who is also like 13 years old, is full on ready and willing to kill Luke right here? In the show, the last time they fought, Percy actually apologizes when he hits him with Riptide because he was just trying to defend himself and now he hurt him. Yet despite having not seen him that entire time since, he's now all good with just straight up executing this dude. I don't really care if it plays out like this in the books, but here, it feels like it's progressing too fast and it's rather needlessly edgy. I'm just not a major fan. Hell, they even have him only barely accepting capturing Luke instead of killing him with this look on his face that says he thinks it's a truly terrible idea. This is just too early, you know? They have to build up this sort of thing if you ask me. They sneak upstairs and avoid the return of Allison before they get Tyson to listen in and tell them what they're saying. Here they get instantly captured and I don't really get how. Do they always know they were there or something? Feels a bit convenient and forced for the plot, but sometimes that kind of thing happens. Also, Luke knows that Tyson's Poseidon's son despite him not being there to see it because he'd already flown off. So this means there's got to be a mole in the camp at this early stage. Is Selena, I think her name is, already feeding info to Luke or something? I also know that Chris Rodriguez from the get-go is meant to be on Luke's side, but he's at camp in the earlier episodes, so I guess he's also a possibility. And I think in some of the trailers there's meant to be a battle at the camp, so maybe he turns there if they're going to go with that storyline at all, since it is pretty brief. I mean, he goes crazy, and then when he's no longer crazy, he's suddenly good again and also in love with Clarice. I don't know, it's not the most compelling storyline in the world, but you never know. It is an important story beat for Clarice, so I guess we'll have to wait and see. They're surrounded, and here we see Luke, and we get a fairly long sequence to set the scene of what's happening. Before we get to that, though, I just want to highlight that Luke's actor is great and does a lot of really great facial expressions. Just perfectly encapsulates a guy who hates the gods so much, but is also legit trying to win these two to his side because he doesn't want to have to kill them. That somewhat kind facade plastered over his absolutely seething demeanor. There's so much anger and fury in his eyes, and when he finds out that Hermes told Percy about the ship, how the muscles in his face are just twitching. Really good acting, and I'm pretty eager to see how he continues to spiral going forward in the season and the show in general. Luke tells them that even though Olympus knows that they're there, it seems nobody's doing shit. Hell, Poseidon's the god of the sea, and they're on a ship, and yet nothing. Why? Luke claims the Titans are returning because Kronos is returning and they can feel their chance. So I guess Oceanus, is that how you say his name, is already thrown down with Poseidon then? I do wonder why this is the case though, because in the old original myth, Oceanus doesn't even fight against Zeus and the Olympians with the Titans, and he gives up his throne to Poseidon willingly. I guess now he's salty about that? I don't know, but I suppose it is needed for the actual plot of the story to work, because otherwise, Luke would be cooked. Hades was able to send monsters after Percy when he thought he took his helmet, so Poseidon could probably do the same, right? I know that there are also rules about interfering, but I feel like rebuilding Kronos would be one of those grey areas that could outright get you smited by the heavens, so they need somebody to challenge Poseidon to ensure it won't happen. It's kind of a shame though, because I did like that in the myth, not all of the Titans were Kronos' lackeys. It added a bit of nuance that sometimes I think Percy Jackson might lack. So they're rebuilding Kronos somehow, I guess with belief, and the more demigods join, the closer it gets to revival. We get some more great acting from Luke where he snaps at Annabeth, telling her that she never really knew Thalia, and that if she was around to hear the great prophecy, she would join up with Luke. They'd been together for 2 years, and Luke knew she hated Zeus and would have been very excited to have the opportunity to tear Olympus down. I do love the dramatic irony of this scene in that he claims that since he knew Thalia longer, he would know best about what she wanted. Meanwhile, the person he scolds, who only knew her 2 months, has the exact right idea about Thalia and what she would do, and it turns out she wouldn't be on board with being the one to tear down Olympus. The dude's just too delusional to see it at this stage of the game because of all his daddy issues. They go down into the lower levels of the ship to see Tyson, and Luke keeps trying to pitch that this is going to be a new era, a new golden age. Oh no, we don't use slurs like monsters, and saying that he'll spare any demigod that joins their ranks when he attacks camp after the barrier falls. He even talks about how he's the chosen of Kronos and that Percy can trust him because the words of the great prophecy are clear. That Percy joining now would bring Kronos back, and they wouldn't even need to keep fighting the campers and trying to recruit them. It would simply be showtime. What I liked about this scene is that it feels genuine. Like Luke legitimately wants them to join him because on some level, he does care about them. That despite everything he's done, he's not really all that keen about having to fight people he considered friends or family. He actually does want to make the world feel better for those that have been victimized by the gods, and in that way, he feels like a grey character, which I like. You want to see that slow descent as he gets worse and worse and eventually realizes that Kronos has played him, but that he has no way out. I'm really liking this so far, and I think this is a very well written scene. I especially love Tyson building his bomb in the background and how it feels just like a little tidbit to show Percy that perhaps Luke has a point. only for the reveal that Tyson built a bomb to save Percy and Annabeth, and then just blew it up out of nowhere. Just a really great moment that went so hard, especially with him slow-mo walking with a flaming jacket through the smoke. Tyson's aura grew immensely from this scene, and honestly, if you don't consider him your brother after all this shit, then I don't know what to tell you. Tyson's probably been one of the best characters so far this season, and that doesn't seem to be changing anytime soon. I also found it curious that when they get up, Allison orders the demigods to kill them, and Luke shouts out no as if to stop them, but she and the others don't listen. I think it's pretty interesting that it doesn't seem like they respect his authority as their leader at this point, as Allison in particular seems to go against what he says a lot in regards to killing people. I do wonder if this leads to some sort of rift. Maybe Luke kills her to try and assert dominance later on in the season to show how far he's fallen? It could be quite literally anything, considering she is a show original character, but she's getting so much importance that I feel like a death has to be coming soon, right? The trio escape onto a lifeboat, and Percy and Luke share some dramatic eye contact, which I always find very funny because they're so far away, there's no chance you could actually make out any expressions at all in real life, but it's such an enduring trope in TV and film. It's goofy, but it actually does work, funnily enough. Percy uses the jar of wind or whatever to escape from the ship, and we head over to Clarice for the scene that we've already talked about, where she wins the loyalty of the crew, and she realizes the only way for her to find out the true coordinates is to speak to Percy, who she already knows is questing himself. We then finish off in the lifeboat with our trio again, and there are a couple of nice heart-to-hearts here. Tyson and Percy seem to bond more closely, and Tyson has a great line saying that even though he liked the giants and they were funny, he saw Annabeth and Percy were in trouble, and he didn't hesitate to help, because that's what a hero's supposed to do. My god, is there anything about this guy that isn't super endearing? I love Tyson. I stan Tyson. I've also noticed that he and Percy are getting way closer than I remember them being in the book, and so I wonder how they're going to deal with his death fake-out. Because in the book, it took that for Percy to accept him and understand he was a true brother, but here, it already feels like he's getting there. Are we going to see a Percy crash out when he thinks Tyson's dead? Then again, can Tyson even die? Or would he just reform eventually because he's a monster? Food for thought. Annabeth also thinks about her conversation with Luke and what was said about Thalia, and since Luke got in her head, she's now willing to tell Percy the prophecy, or rather the gist of the prophecy, and surprise, surprise, he didn't want to know about it. Fair enough, because honestly, this is such a shit time to tell him this. I get she's 13, but my god, this is 100% the type of conversation you have at camp when he has time to process things. Not when you are sailing into one of the most dangerous places in the entire world, where you need to be on the top of your game at all times. So this was certainly a choice, but hey, you don't want perfect characters, do you? You want flawed characters to make drama which develops your story, so there we go. Honestly, I love this episode. It felt like it returned to some of the goofy elements the series is known for, it had a compelling plot, and fleshed out characters nicely. The next episode promises Clarice versus Percy Part 2, and some sea monster shenanigans to get Clarice freaking out. Hell yeah, keen for next week, but until then, these have all been my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What did you think of the episode? Did you like it, hate it? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and let me know.